Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. During this hour, we'll explore the history of the Women's Baseball League and uncover why softball appears to have taken its place. And later, the foundational roots of Christian music comes from Negro spirituals, the music that helped countless enslaved Africans find hope and strength during a time when freedom seemed out of reach. We begin with a dive into the historic All-American Girls Baseball League. What happened to women's baseball? No, I'm not talking about softball. I'm talking about hardball, the same sport men play in the major leagues. The reality is, women have been playing baseball for well over a century. Some of the earliest teams can be traced back to the 1890s. As those teams expanded and the players developed over time, the women, for a brief period during World War II, created their own league. It was called the All-American Girls League and was depicted in one of my all-time favorite movies, the 1992 classic film, A League of Their Own. That league only lasted 11 years, but the journey these women and, at the time, girls took to establish their own sport is a true testament to their perseverance. Leslie Hepley is the president of the International Women's Baseball Center and a history professor at Kent State University. She spoke with the Metro's Carrie Jr. II about the development of organized women's baseball.
So I want to start with when women started playing baseball. I imagine women have been playing about as long as men have, right?
Yes, from as long as baseball, we can trace it back to its origins before it was played in this country, when it was called other things. Women have played. For women playing in a more serious way, it's after the Civil War, kind of when baseball takes off just in general. For a lot of people, they think of the Cincinnati Reds becoming the first fully professional team. So it's around that time because the Civil War is really what spreads baseball. And so our first real significant women's baseball team, they're known as the Vassar Resolutes. From Vassar College in the 1860s. And the Vassar Resolutes, we know about them mostly because of letters written by one of the players. Her name was Annie Glidden, and Annie wrote letters to her brother asking if she could borrow his, and this is going to sound weird because they didn't really play with gloves, but it was at least a glove that was a little bit more than what you'd wear in the wintertime, right? But she essentially was asking him for his equipment, his permission to play. And he basically laughed at her and said, "Why would you want this?" And she said, "Because I'm going to play baseball." And he didn't think that was something that women did. So when the Vassar Resolutes start, they start by playing one another. So freshmen playing sophomore, seniors, so it's all internal to the college. And then it begins to spread from there to all the other women's colleges, Smith, St. Rose, things like, and so you start to develop what we would then say some intercollegiate play, right? Well, still with no championships or anything like that. There were two very big rules that most of the schools played by, and this is where it gets kind of fun. So one of the rules, and this was true at Vassar, was the only way the school would let them play was if they played where no one could actually see them play. So if they're playing outside, imagine this. You've got the road in front of you where people's buggies may go by and things like that. And then you have a building, so they'd have to play behind the building so no one from the outside would ever know that they were playing a sport that was strenuous, that was seen as a men's sport.
Whose choice was that? Whose decision was this?
The school, the universities, that was, and then the second rule was they could only play as long as nothing got broken. And you think, okay, that's fair. Don't want broken arms and legs. That is not what they meant. When one of the girls broke a window at the university, that put an end to their team. So they were more worried about the building than they were the players.
Describe the social norms the women who played baseball at this time faced.
So when we're looking at the 19th century and we're looking at women's roles in the 19th century, and this is true we're pretty much all the way up and into the 20th century, right? Most expectations of society were framed around the idea of of this sort of virtuous kind of idea of women, almost putting them up, particularly when you're talking about different classes of women, white women up on a pedestal, right? And so the last thing that you expected them to do was to participate in anything masculine or anything strenuous because they generally genuinely believed, many people, that all of that could cause women to have health issues, and that would then result in them not being able to have healthy children. And after all, that was their primary responsibility and duty in society, right? And so you didn't want to do. There are actually pamphlets and documents that come out during the 19th century from supposed um, scientific figures. Some of them believe that there's only a certain amount of energy in your body,
Hmm.
and that if you use it intellectually, it'll actually take away from the how the rest of your body works.
Oh,
And that was,
interesting.
yeah. And so you didn't want to do anything. And then of course there's the added class issues, things like that,
Mm.
where certain the assumption was that, upper class white women in particular, right, didn't have to work, didn't have to do, and those that did, that created a separation. And you wanted to aspire to be somebody that didn't have to work and do strenuous things. And it's not until the really 1880s, early 1890s that we start to see a, a significant pushback in the idea that, well, maybe actually if women were exercising, limited, but that would actually make them healthier.
Hmm.
And that would actually be a good thing.
Hmm.
And one of the things that helps contribute to that is not so much baseball, but it's actually the bicycle.
Ah.
Because the bicycle in the 1890s becomes a very popular entity for women because there's no competition and there's no interaction with the opposite sex. There's no right physical, and so the bicycle becomes a help in pushing the idea that now, after all, maybe exercise is good for women. Moderation, always moderation, right?
That's interesting. So it's like the sport of baseball is a part of like this lineage of our social acceptance for
Mhm.
physical
Absolutely.
fitness or movement, or what's
Mhm.
allowed or expected for women to do
Well, and
physically.
it's also seen as, you also got to understand how baseball was viewed in the
Hmm.
second half of the 19th century. And so baseball itself, amateur sport that becomes a professional sport. And
Hmm.
when baseball moves out of that amateur rank into the professional rank, there is this general idea that baseball is associated with gambling and drinking
Mm.
and not the best behavior and attracted sometimes lesser sorts, true or otherwise. And therefore, why would you want your daughters to be involved in something like that? Because after all, the women's role was supposed to be at home and the men's role was out in the
Out in the
world.
world, yeah.
And you don't want them corrupted. And why would you want your daughters to participate in a sport that was both strenuous and physical, but also somewhat looked down upon? And it's not going to raise her status in society. It's going to make people question her and who her morals, and then question potentially her parents for allowing her to do this.
What other hurdles did these women face?
Money. Who's going to own the teams? Who's going to, because women didn't have those kinds of jobs. So they needed men to support that, and that then translates into, so how do they travel? Where do they stay? Where they don't have stadiums of their own. So are the men going to let them play in their own stadium?
Did the fact that men had all the money create any other complications?
I could give you a great example. In the 19th century, when all this was getting started, there was a gentleman by the name of Sylvester Wilson who was notorious for starting a team, taking them travel to play somewhere, and after they played, he would steal. He would essentially embezzle the money and leave them high and dry in a town away from home with no money. And he did that continuously, to the point where he changed his name a couple times because he got run out of town by police trying to arrest him for, so that didn't help the situation when you've got individuals like him basically taking advantage of these young women. And so, once again, why would you encourage your daughters to get involved in something like that?
So all of these pressures are what these women at the Vassar Resolutes and the other colleges are facing when they decide to compete and start a league.
Yep.
You're listening to the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. My guest is Leslie Heafy. She is the president of the International Women's Baseball Center and a history professor at Kent State University. We are discussing the early years of women's baseball and the events that led to the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So what happens next? The Resolutes start, the sport begins to spread to other colleges.
Right. It spreads to other colleges. And then as it starts to spread, we see the creation of some independent teams. Mostly, I guess you could call them amateur, semi-pro. But they're independent teams because there are no leagues. And the first set of women's teams like that are called the Reds and the Blues. And they were simply called the Reds and the Blues based on either the color of their hat or the color of the belt they wore around their dress. So it makes it really interesting when you're trying to research when the teams are just called the Philadelphia Reds and the Philadelphia Blues, and so's that team's the Philadelphia Reds, and so's that team. um, and they were often portrayed in the newspapers as more vaudevillian and more about entertainment than we don't take these girls seriously. And they probably weren't the best ball players. There's a lot of articles. Some of my favorites are them. They spend more time either talking about their dress and how they look or how ridiculous they look out in the field. And there's always articles about them tripping and falling on their long skirts because they're still wearing the long dresses. And so there's lots of discussion about them not being able to run in these, which is kind of fun to read. So you got the Reds and Blues. And so there's a lot of those teams around. And then gradually we moved from them to what became probably the best level of baseball for women in the late 1880s all the way through the 1930s. And that's going to be bloomer teams. For those who aren't familiar, bloomers were the first sort of equivalent for pants for women. They were popularized in the 1890s by the bicycle because you can't ride a bike with a long skirt on. So we're going to see a much higher level of baseball acumen and baseball skill from some of those teams. And so that's why they really grow. And there's women playing all over the country. And at the same time that we see that happening, we're also going to start to see some individual women with enough skill to be invited to play on men's teams.
What year is that?
As early as late 1890s, we see that happening. Lizzie Murphy, Lizzie Arlington, a number of women like that who are going to get an invite. And most of them were often first basemen. That just seemed to be a good position for them. The one unique thing about the bloomer teams that people might be interested in is typically, not all of them, but often they were a women's team that had either 2 or 3 men on the team and those men usually were the pitcher and the catcher. And sometimes the third man was the shortstop because those were considered to be the most important and the thinking. And they didn't think women could do that.
So how is attendance going? Are people going to see the games at this point?
So by the time we hit the bloomer teams and even the Reds and the Blues, you start getting in the newspapers coverage of fans attending. And so you'll get not all articles, but some of them talking about anywhere from a couple hundred to 1,000, sometimes up to 1,500 people, men, women, and families who will come out to watch. And the speculation that is often in the newspapers is, are these people there because they actually think they're going to see good baseball, or is it more because they think they're going to be entertained?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it is they come because they think it's going to be funny. They think it's going to be that kind. But you also read that some of them walk away realizing that actually some of them can play. So, for example, there's a young lady who plays for the New York Bloomers. Her name is Stella Friss. And the articles in the newspapers about Stella always talk about her as one of the best female baseball players in the country, as having a skill set that is only matched by other male players, that she could hold her own against. And so you start to see the fan experience, the reaction runs the gamut from this is just entertainment to, oh, wow. There's even a young lady by the name of Agnes Parker, also playing for the New York Bloomer Girls. The newspapers refer to her as the Babe Ruth of women's baseball.
How does this build the momentum for the eventual founding of the All-American Women's Professional Baseball League?
I think you could argue historically that the 1920s are somewhat responsible because that is considered the age of play.
Okay.
And so there's a little more acceptance of this new generation of women that come along. So I think that adds to it. But then World War II is really the impetus for the league because over 530 baseball players from major and minor league baseball will be drafted into World War II. So baseball by that point, being played by men, is still America's national pastime by far. To the point where rationing is done during World War II, one of the questions that comes up about gas rationing is what will happen to sports teams. And FDR writes a letter that is now referred to as his green light letter. And in it, he says baseball is exempt. They can still travel. They can, where everybody else is, they're rationing gas. He says that's because he said we need things like baseball to provide an outlet for people, right? And so I think it's that recognition of the importance that baseball played as a whole in American society that makes it possible for the All-American League to come to fruition because they're going to fill the gap left by the men.
Right, they're going to play. So they made the All-American Girls League to fill that gap?
Yeah. So for the first time ever, Philip Wrigley, who's the owner of the Cubs, makes a decision, and he is the person that starts this, that he wants to create what was originally supposed to be a softball league for women. In his mind, because all of these men are being drafted, he wanted to create something that would fill the gap and give people something to watch and be entertained by, an outlet, all of the lift morale. And he thought, what better than a women's softball league? So it doesn't, it's not replacing baseball, but it'll be a temporary stopgap. And that was the key in his mind, temporary. But it all changes because Wrigley ends up only owning the league for the first year. And then he sells it to his essential right-hand man, Art Meyerhoff. And Meyerhoff intends to keep the league going and wants to see if it can be profitable. And so that's how the league extends beyond its first year, which was not the intent.
And then how many years does it last?
So it lasted from 1943 to 1950 through 1954.
Okay. So about
just
11 years.
Beyond a decade.
Okay,
Yep.
I see. And then what ultimately led to the ending of it? Because it wasn't the war itself.
I think there's a number of things, but one of the biggest things that ends the league is simply television. Television provides the opportunity for people to say, okay, do we go out to a women's game or do we sit at home and watch a major league game on TV? And so television is also going to have the same impact on men's baseball in the semi-professional and the industrial ranks. So all those opportunities start to dry up as well. Because for most people, that was your option. Do you go watch a women's team or do I get to watch Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle and these guys on television? That's the choice people start making. So that's one of the primary reasons. The other is just the attitude of the 1950s. The 1950s are socially known for sort of this idea of returning to the way things were before. There's a lot of push for you. You're too young to remember any of these, but the shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, right? Those are all 1950s shows, and they're all about mom staying home, the perfect family, the white picket fence, the 2 kids, right? So there's this push to push women back into roles that were more acceptable in previous generations. And so I think the combination of these kinds of things are going to be what puts an end to the Women's League.
Coming up, we'll get right back into the conversation and find out how softball has carried the legacy of the All-American Girls League forward. Stay right there. We'll be right back. This is The Metro. This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. Softball and baseball are two different sports with different rules. Softball was created for women and has remained the primary sport they play through high school and college. The sport has produced fierce athletes who have, at times, gone toe to toe with Major League Baseball players. However, softball, like many women's sports, has not been able to escape being viewed as the lesser sport when compared to men's baseball. Leslie Heafy is president of the International Women's Baseball Center and a history professor at Kent State University. In our conversation with Carey Jr. II, they discussed this dynamic between softball and baseball and examined why it has become so gendered.
So, Professor Heafy, why don't we have women's baseball or women's baseball league today?
Unfortunately, Little League is significantly responsible for the change because it's Little League that's created in the 1930s, along with American Legion Ball and things like that, that eventually makes very specific rules that say that women can't play, that girls are not welcome, and so when they start making those rules, and their alternative is, well, they've got another game to play, and the only reason that young girls got to continue to play baseball past a certain age was because of people like Maria Pepe and Katherine Johnson. Maria Pepe took Little League to court in the 1970s and challenged that rule, and she won. Decisions like that opened the doors for women to say, young girls and women to say, okay, no, it's challenging, but we are allowed to play baseball. We don't have to just play softball. And so today, and for a long time, women's baseball has continued. And currently, we have women baseball teams, not just here in the United States, but in over 37 countries. But here in the United States, we have girls playing at every level of baseball, from Little League through college.
So, if women are playing baseball, at what point did softball become the more dominant sport among women?
Because of this idea that has long been held that softball is the sport for girls and baseball is the sport for boys. Softball, after all, the name of the ball
It's soft.
is a softball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we call it. And so when you call it, and it's a bigger ball, right? So therefore,
Easier
it's
to
easier
hit.
to catch, it's easier to hit, the bases are shorter. But here's the funny thing. Jenny Finch, who was a professional softball player, once used to participate in the celebrity softball games, baseball games, but a couple of the major league players at one point wanted to go up and try to hit against her, and realized it was not easy at all because the distance from the pitching mound to home plate is shorter, and she's pitching underhand at 70, 80 miles an hour at a shorter distance, so they have even less time to see the ball. Our whole point is just simply that softball and baseball are not the same game.
Right.
But everybody wants to use them as equivalents because softball's a great game. No, but it's not the same game. It has different rules. It uses a bat and a ball and a diamond, but there are lots of things that are different. And most people don't realize that. And so they just think they see bat, ball, they're running around the bases. It's the same game, but it's not. And so that, I think, is the problem.
So explain it to me. How is softball different from baseball?
Sure. So in softball, you can't lead off first base.
Oh, okay.
There's no leading off first base, so it changes stolen bases.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to wait till the pitch, right? There's no leadoffs. You can't do that. And that's a huge difference. The distance from pitching mound to home plate, the base pass themselves are shorter. So that changes the nature of the game in terms of how the fielders play it. In professional softball, or even in college softball today, you'll see them often the pitcher is wearing a batting helmet, essentially out with a big guard, because they're so close, they don't have time to react, and they get hit. They're much more likely to get hit in the face by a ball. Often the third baseman will also be wearing it because the third baseman is almost always playing about half the distance into home plate, and that ball then is like 20 feet away from them when it's hit.
Wow.
And so when you watch it, if you're really paying attention, you can immediately see all of the differences.
That's interesting because softball has always felt like it was portrayed as an easier sport than baseball, but you're saying that's not the case at all.
Oh, not at all. Oh gosh, softball is an incredible sport and it has incredible athletes. The point is simply that they are different sports, and the whole point for thinking about women playing baseball is just simply that if that's what a girl wants to play, she should be allowed to
Hmm.
and not be forced to say, go to softball because that's all that's available to you. They should get to choose, just like anybody else, what direction they want to go.
And I guess on the opposite, on the flip side, I don't really know too many boys who play softball. And
Well,
couldn't we? Oh, go
that's
ahead.
correct. There just isn't, and that's usually the argument people use. Are boys then allowed on girls' softball teams?
Oh,
And typically the answer is there. There hasn't been much challenge
hmm,
to do that
yeah,
because they play baseball, but for the same reason. Because I would argue society says baseball is for boys, softball is for girls,
yeah.
and guys tend to play softball in recreational leagues, and so that adds to this idea that softball is fits in this category, and none of that is true. That's just what society wants us to accept, and we reinforce those ideas all the time. Both of them are great and wonderful sports in their own right.
Hmm.
And the problem for on the women's side is they haven't historically been able to choose.
Hmm.
They've been told that this is your avenue and you don't get to step out of that. And they're like, but I want to play that game. Why can't I play that one? It's different and that's the one I want to play. For most women, they don't want to play because people will also say, well, they just want to play in the men's and they're going to take spots away from men. If you ask most women, they want to play in their own leagues like they did in the 40s. That's what they want. Now, that's not to say if there was a woman that is capable of playing in Major League Baseball, let her play. But the vast majority of women, that's not what they want. They're looking to have a, the equivalent of WNBA. And so they're not looking to take away the men's places in the game.
You're listening to the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. My guest is Leslie Heafy. She is the president of the International Women's Baseball Center and a history professor at Kent State University. We're discussing the history of women's baseball in the United States. So, Professor Heafy, the Women's Professional Baseball League, starting this August, not softball, baseball. What can you tell me about it?
Sure. Starting this August, we're going to have a new professional women's baseball league. It starts August 1st. And there will be 4 teams playing in this league for this first season. And they're going to be playing in Springfield, Illinois, all 4 teams, representing the cities of Boston, New York, San Francisco, and why am I forgetting the 4th one? That's terrible. It'll come back to me. But there are 4, but they're going to play in one city to lessen the cost of travel and things like that to help the league get off. But these are all women who have been playing baseball at the college level, who've been playing baseball on Canada's national team, the U.S.'s national team, Mexico's national team, Japan's national team, Australia. It's going to involve women from all of these countries. They had their draft last year, and so they're kicking off technically 3rd attempt at a professional league because it was a short-lived one in the 1990s. It didn't last very long.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we had a professional women's baseball team in the 90s as well, the
Mhm.
Colorado Silver Bullets.
Hmm.
They played from 1994 to 1997. So women have never really, they never really left the game ever. And so right now when people think they're coming back, I like to say, no, they actually never left.
So, outside of sports, what is the legacy of the All American Girls League and all the women pioneers who played baseball up until now?
Oh, great question. And I mean, I think it's easy to just settle on it and say, well, they opened the doors for more women to play baseball. And
Right.
that is true. But that's a very narrow view of their legacy because the legacy of all of and each generation is no, they're opening doors,
Mhm.
they're opening opportunities, they're pressing against, if you want to use that term, the glass ceiling, right, in corporate. But one of the things that you find out from the All-American League, for example, is the number of women, because these were young women. Most of them range in age from 16 to 24,
Wow.
who went on to go to college, who went on to get masters and PhDs, who
Wow.
went on to work in corporate America. And to a person, when they've been interviewed, they always said that the reason they were able to do that was because of the opportunities that baseball provided for them, that baseball opened those doors, taught them, let them see the world, showed them what was possible, and made them believe that they could do more than they would have ever done otherwise. And I think that's really the legacy, is just saying to, in this particular case, a young girl, dream big. If that's what you want to be, history shows us that you can do it, that you don't need to listen to those who tell you no. Right. And I think that's the legacy that we're seeing, and that spreads across all of life, right? It's not just a baseball story, it's a much bigger story of what perseverance can bring. Comes down to, if you can see it, you think you can be it, right? But if you don't see anybody, it just says, oh, that's not something we're supposed to do. And so if you take that to just look at society as a whole, that's what pioneers do. And that's what the All-American and all the other women that before them and since them continue to do that. And that, I think that's what's important, is now we can see young girls getting that chance to live out a dream that never would have been possible otherwise.
Leslie Heafy is the president of the International Women's Baseball Center and a history professor at Kent State University. She spoke to the Metro's Carrie Jr. II.